Mushrooms are so cool. They're just endlessly out there in nature. They're ephemeral, they're ethereal, they come up, they disappear. They're beautiful colors, they're wonderful textures. It's a thing that's around us all the time. We're standing on mycelium. We're standing on the bodies of mushrooms right now, but we're not seeing the fruiting bodies right now. And that's so cool to me, that there's sort of hidden cryptic life all around us all the time.
This is Gordon Walker. He's a biochemistry PhD, a wine and fermentation consultant, and he really likes fungi.
What else we got back here? So this is a Dyer's polypore, Bacterius xanthodermis, a Lexinum species.
So there's one you stepped on.
Oh, shit.
Right there, too.
Oh, that's a Lacaria, don't worry about that. I'm not sure this is a Pluteus. This is probably a Cortinarius.
He's also, kind of famous. His Instagram account, fascinatedbyfungi, has over 50,000 followers. He brought me to his favorite foraging spot 2 hours north of San Francisco to help me understand why a crop of new fungi-based meat startups could soon compete with established players like Impossible and beyond.
Hi guys, I'm Gordon. Nice to meet you. I'll be speaking tonight on mushrooms. There we go. So this is my logo, Fascinated by Fungi. It is sort of inspired by my passion for mushrooms. I worked with an artist, Chris Oxley, to kind of bring one of these Arcambolo faces to life, but with mushrooms. I've had a lot of people tell me that this is somewhat terrifying, but I hope it's also somewhat fascinating. Sort of just had the idea that I wanted to construct my face with all these various mushroom bits. So I hope you guys enjoy it. But Fascinated by Fungi is a sort of social media platform that I adopted to help share my passion and my interest in mushrooms with people. It came about while I was living in New Zealand with my partner. She was working 12-hour shifts at a winery and I got bored. So I started going hiking, and it was a particularly wet year in New Zealand, and there was just mushrooms everywhere. And I'd been fascinated by fungi as a kid, but had sort of forgotten about it for like 20 years. And suddenly I found myself, down on the ground, all these weird angles, trying to take pictures of mushrooms to figure out what the heck they were. And after about a month, I had hundreds of mushroom photos on my phone and no idea what to do with all of them. So I started posting some of them to Instagram, and I found this really amazing community of people where I got great feedback, advice on IDs, insights into biology, the chemistry, all sorts of stuff. And that has sort of blossomed over the years to all these different social media sites. TikTok has been an especially fun one because I get to do a lot of videos and it's a little more interactive. Definitely a big shout out to iNaturalist, and that's my favorite app for helping to ID mushrooms and helping to track my finds, and that is actually from the Academy itself. So I highly recommend everyone using iNaturalist for any of your naturalist needs. But let's hop into it. Let's talk about mushrooms, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of everything I can in about 20 minutes. So we'll see how far we get. So I'm trying to put mushrooms in sort of an evolutionary context. We got to think a little bit about life in general. So there are three main domains of life. There's bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And within eukarya, there are multiple kingdoms, things we're more familiar with, like animals and plants and fungi. But fungi have always been sort of overlooked. And that is because they are frequently invisible, right? You don't see mushrooms when they're out there. They are present, but unless the fruiting body is there, it's otherwise completely invisible to you. And in fact, it wasn't until the 70s that fungi even were recognized as their own kingdom. Before that, people kind of just lumped them in together with plants, but they are distinctly very different from plant evolutionary and metabolically, in that plants are fixing sugars using the energy of the sun and chlorophyll to turn carbon dioxide into sugars, whereas mushrooms are eating stuff. They're catabolic, so they're like animals in that they're digesting their food. In an overall sense, I think mushrooms are often ignored, like I talked about. There's sort of this little branch here, even though they're an entire kingdom of this huge, beautiful tree of life. And mushrooms are kind of closely related to animals, or not closely related. That's a misnomer. They are more related to animals than they are to plants. And that's to say that animals and fungi both use a polysaccharide called chitin. So insects and mollusks and some other organisms will use chitin in their exoskeletons and their shells, and fungi use chitin in their cell walls as well. Generally, when we're going to talk about mushrooms, I'm going to focus on Basidiomycota and Ascomycota. There are other phylum of fungi that are super interesting, but they don't produce the large fruiting bodies or the mushrooms that we're used to see. So let's talk about some sort of fungal life strategies. There are saprophytic fungi. So these are mushrooms that are digesting the organic matter. So they're living in their food, whether it be soil or wood or whatever substrate they're living in and on it. There are parasitic mushrooms. So those are mushrooms that are preying on a plant or another fungi. And there are mycorrhizal mushrooms that live sort of in some symbiosis and live in concert with plants. And honestly, 90% of the plants on the planet have some sort of fungal partner. So this is a very common type of association. And there's even mushrooms that will shift from being mycorrhizal to being saprophytic. So if a mushroom is growing with this tree and helping the tree absorb water, absorb nutrients, it's got this great symbiosis. If the tree happens to die for another reason, that mushroom might turn around and eat the tree. So it's eating what it was previously living on. The mushrooms are kind of metal like that. But there are, as I mentioned, two main sort of subdivisions of mushrooms. There's basidiomycetes and ascomycetes. So basidiomycetes make up the majority of the guild mushrooms that we're familiar with, large, pretty visible mushrooms. Ascomycetes are generally a little bit smaller. There's some weird ones like morels and truffles in there. The biggest difference is that basidia are sort of these big club-like structures with spores on the end of them. And ascomycetes instead have an ascus, which is sort of just like a bubble or a sphere that is filled with the spores. Mushrooms live as dikaryotes, so they have two copies of their genome. They will sporulate and release those spores into the environment, and that's part of how they are doing their life cycle. And do sexual reproduction. You can also do clonal asexual reproduction, and there's even some mushrooms that can do both at the same time. This is a dendrocolibia. It's a cool little mushroom that grows on degrading russulas. And from the cap, it releases sexual spores. And then from the stipe, these little nubs release asexual spores. So it's kind of doing both at the same time. It's a way to hedge your bets from a genetic standpoint. So I want to draw the distinction between mushroom versus mycelium. Mycelium is really the body of the mushroom, the fungi that's living in the substrate, the soil or the dirt that we think about. And that's what's cryptic. We don't see that most of the time. What we see is when that mycelium has absorbed enough nutrients and environmental conditions are favorable, it will make the decision to fruit and put up a mushroom. And that mushroom is very akin to like a flower or a fruit that you would see on a plant. And much like on a plant, if you remove the mushroom, you don't necessarily kill the plant. You're just removing, one thing from the environment. And this is the spore-bearing fruiting body of the mushroom. And so that's important to kind of keep in mind, the regenerative, the vegetative versus the reproductive phase of these mushrooms. But this mycelium is really interesting stuff. It's made of these hyphal cells. These are fungal cells that are sort of like finger-like projections. And they are complex in terms of the components in their membranes. There's nanoproteins, there's glucans, there's phospholipid membranes. They're not that dissimilar from an animal cell, but these fungal membranes and these hypha in particular are incredibly adaptable and can even be weaponized to attack plants. And that's a really important part of how mushrooms do their stuff. So there's an incredible diversity of different mushroom morphologies that are out there. There are things like truffles and these hypogeous fungi that live underground. They do that as sort of an adaptation when moisture is sort of limiting. They don't want to dry out, so they form a little fruiting body underground, but you'll never be able to spread your spores if you're stuck underground. So these truffles have adopted the ability to create an incredible diversity of smells that are very appealing to animals. So animals will come dig them up and help them disperse their spores. There's some of the ascomycetes, the morels, and the cup fungi, and some of these club fungi that I mentioned. Basidiomycetes really have the broadest range of different morphologies that are out there. You have gills and pores and teeth and stink horns and little bird's nest fungi and all sorts of stuff that are just amazing. Go on my page if you want to look at the diversity of all the different morphologies that are out there. But it's incredible because mushrooms have a capacity to be closely related but look completely different. And sort of the opposite, where you have convergent evolution, where things come from different evolutionary lineages and they end up looking very similar. Gills have been evolved multiple times. Pores have been evolved multiple times, as have corals and clubs and all sorts of stuff. There's morphologies because there's only a limited number of ways where it's efficient to disperse spores. So mushrooms have figured out again and again, like some of these morphologies that work for them. So let's talk a little bit about fungal life strategies. I mentioned mycorrhizal mushrooms. This is where you have the mushroom and the plant kind of working in symbiosis together. The plant is providing sugar and the mushroom is providing a lot of surface area on the roots and really helping with uptake of water, of nutrients, helping to sequester certain things that might be, detrimental to the plant. It's a pretty incredible relationship. And there's a lot of really good edible mushrooms that we think about: chanterelles, porcinis, black trumpets, all sorts of stuff are mycorrhizal mushrooms. Then we have endophytes. So these are incredible fungi that live inside of the mushroom cells, sorry, inside of the plant cells. In between, plant cells actually have gaps in between them, and often fungi will live between those gaps with bacteria as well. And that is a big part of research that's going on in crop sciences right now to better understand the interactions between endophytes and their hosts and how that affects the metabolism of the plant. We have full parasitism, stuff like armillaria or honey mushrooms. So these are mushrooms that are very strong parasitic mushrooms. They can weaponize their hyphae to girdle a tree, create meadows. It's kind of a ecological thing, ecological disturbance. We'll think about that a little bit later, but where fungi and plants don't see eye to eye. There are things like wheat lacoche or corn smut, cedar apple rust. These are some very strange looking fungi that infect plants. There are also fungi that infect other fungi. So you have molds like hypomyces, or these little powder top mushrooms that infect big old moldy mushrooms. I see those back in the East Coast. And there's even plants that get in on this this thing where the plants are being parasitic on the mushroom. And those are called mycoheterotrophs. And those are plants that have tapped into the mycelium and are taking their sugars from the mushroom, but they're not doing any actual photosynthesis. So the sugars are coming from the host plant to the mushroom to this mycoheterotroph. And it was seen previously as always being parasitic, but we're seeing more and more that maybe these mycoheterotrophs actually are helping to establish the mycorrhizal networks and kind of beat out competition. So it's pretty incredible, all of the ecological webs and how they spin together when we think about the fungi kingdom. So mushrooms are survivors, right? As soon as they fruit, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that is trying to eat them, whether it's plants or slugs, snails, insects. There's incredible diversity of environmental factors that they have to deal with. And, not to mention the human destruction of habitat. But what I want to think about is really like a mushroom like a lion's mane here can be out in the environment for many weeks. And how does something that is so delectable and obviously, in high demand by a lot of these creatures actually subsist for so long? And that's because mushrooms are chock full of these bioactive compounds. So they have a whole range of polysaccharides like the beta glucans, phospholipids, fatty acids, sterols, terpenes, polyketides, antioxidants, organic acids, lectins, a huge range of compounds that are bioactive. And a lot of these compounds have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial. They are cytotoxic in that they can kill cells. So anything that is trying to eat these mushrooms might be ingesting some of these compounds. And certainly if you think about like the size of a mushroom versus a bug, and a bug takes a bite of a mushroom, there might be very powerful effects on that bug system from even a low concentration of some of these bioactive compounds. And it's something that we can think about because we have started, human beings have started to capitalize on the incredible diversity of secondary chemistry that mushrooms do, and looking at that for therapeutics and human health. And that's a big thing. We look at some of these beta glucans. They can be absorbed in the lumen of the intestine, kind of chopped up and redistributed to your white blood cells in a way that really helps stimulate your immune system, stimulate its response, help to inhibit pathogenic fungi, and potentially even inhibit cancer cells. So there's incredible work happening with this. There's real potential for mushrooms to be used as a therapeutic, but unfortunately, we don't have that much clinical data yet either. So, just be careful what you read. Always stick with the science. It's a good time to talk about cordyceps. They are some of the most incredible looking mushrooms that are out there. These are very specific mushrooms that prey on certain insect hosts. And there's a huge diversity of these in like the cloud forests of Ecuador and in South America. In North America, we don't have that many of them, and there's not that many different relationships, at least not that many of them cataloged. Um, but these are mushrooms that will infect a bug, take over its system by growing hyphate into the bug's system, affecting gene expression, and kind of taking over the mechanics of the bug, often causing it to walk upwards to a high point and release its spores to infect yet another generation. And there's just this incredible diversity of phenotypes for cordyceps out there. And I want to thank Damon, who I'm using his pictures because he has slogged around in the forests of Ecuador. I'm not quite that hardcore. Um, but cordyceps have gotten really popular in popular culture too, because they were featured in The Last of Us, a video game where a cordyceps mutated and started infecting humans, creating sort of these crazy zombie things. And I can assure you guys that there's probably no way that's going to ever happen because cordyceps are very specific to their insect hosts. And I think making the jump to humans would be a little bit too much for them unless someone's doing some really crazy genetic engineering. But one of the really interesting things when I was mentioning the therapeutics is cordyceps have this molecule called cordycepin. And it looks a heck of a lot like adenosine, which is a nucleotide base. And if cordycepin is present in a cell and gets incorporated into an mRNA message, it terminates the message. So it's actually a potential therapeutic that we can use to control really fast growing cells in our body. So we can use it to inhibit viruses and potentially cancer cells. So that's some incredible stuff that cordyceps can do. And that's, again, sort of the intersection between pop culture and all sorts of stuff. So fungi are ubiquitous and pervasive. They are everywhere at every interface in life. They are in lichens, they are in the air, they are on surfaces. There's even, fungi that live in the water, which is pretty mind blowing to me. You won't see mushrooms, but there are fungi there. And because of their ability to be absolutely everywhere, they're really good for bioremediation. And this is when you think about we have an ecosystem that has been wrecked by human activities often enough, usually the spilling of hydrocarbons or other forms of pollutants. And you can get microbial transformation of mushrooms uptaking, sequestering, transforming some of these toxic compounds, and hopefully helping to restore the ecosystem, in concert with bacteria and plants. And that's a really good thing. Ideally, we can use mushrooms to kind of help save the world and restore some of the damage we've done. But unfortunately, fungi can also have really detrimental effects. And this is going back to the idea of parasitic stuff. And there's a fungi called Phytophthora ramorum, and it causes sudden oak death. So this is a disease that is ravaging California right now. And Phytophthora remora has a reservoir in California Bay Laurel. When it's near tan oak, it will jump to tan oak, and it doesn't directly kill the tree, but it causes a massive downregulation of the tree's immune system and ability to deal with stress. And so sudden oak death does eventually cause the death of these trees. And even though they're able to resprout, they never grow as big and never get as strong. So this disease is currently really changing the landscape of California forests. And the study of disturbance ecology is really looking at how factors like that, combined with stuff like fire and climate change, are affecting our ecosystems. And we look towards the future and try to figure out what's going to happen in our forests, what's going to happen with our fungal populations or plant populations. I think there'll be a little bit more about disturbance ecology later. But we're also sort of on the edge of this mushroom cultivation revolution. We've been growing mushrooms for years in industrial settings for the incredible set of enzymes that they have. And we're also looking at more novel enzymes from fungi now for human health, for bioremediation, for even just stuff. Your laundry detergent is full of fungal enzymes. There's a huge revolution in mycomaterials that's happening. So there's making packing materials. This high school student made a canoe that was pretty cool. There's companies making fabrics. In the Bay Area, we have MycoWorks and Bolt Threads that are both making sort of a mushroom leather kind of thing. Looking forward to somebody having a mushroom leather coat. That would be really cool. Maybe a mushroom couch. There's potential for therapeutics. So we've got a classic example of something like Taxol, which is a really, really important cancer drug that was derived from fungi. And there's incredible potential for people to be helped by entheogenic substances and some of the psilocybe mushrooms, and helping people deal with depression and PTSD. There's a lot to be said for that. My most favorite part of all this is eating mushrooms, because I am very food motivated, and I think that mushrooms are a delicious and super sustainable source of protein. And so I'm super excited about the kind of coming food revolution that I see with sustainable fungal foods of the future. One that's been around for a long time is a product called corn, and that's actually produced from a mushroom, well, Fusarium, which is a fungi. It's sort of grown in a giant bioreactor. And this is essentially what's called an airlift reactor. So it's a huge tube of media, and cells are getting cycled up and down, um, creating bigger and bigger chunks of cells. Once they get big enough, they'll fall out and they're harvested, heat treated, and packed into corn. There's multiple other companies around doing similar things with different strains of fungi. There's Prime Roots, which is making some really cool bacon-like products. There's Meaty, which is using mycelium as well. There's Wild Earth, which is making a dog food based on fungi. So those are all really cool sort of future food things. But for the right here and now, there are incredible local farms growing some really good mushrooms. Far West Fungi and Mycopia are both local to the Bay Area, and they are incredibly sustainable, family-run farms. I think if you think about the amount of water it takes to produce a pound of beef, it's something like 1,600 gallons for a pound of beef, where you can grow a pound of mushroom protein for probably about 12 gallons of water. So as we look forward to the future of climate change, I think we're going to have to reduce meat consumption. And for me, I think mushrooms are a perfect way to help, kind of fill in the gaps. And they're delicious and nutritious and good for you. So thank you guys very much for listening. My account, Fascinated by Fungi, is really focused on the phenology. So looking at mushrooms, be aware of what's your environment, take a picture, throw it on INAT, send me a picture, see if I'm not always that great with IDs, but I'm always excited to see what you guys send. Um, Definitely into the photography element. I don't have a fancy camera. I just use my phone, a little macro lens that I strap on. So don't feel like you need to buy something. You can just go out, go for a hike, get out there and see what's there. I like to cook a lot. I'm definitely, like I said, food motivated. So follow my stories. I do a lot of cooking. The biochemistry and the ecology. I have a science background. My background's actually in wine, but I found fungi to be incredibly interesting in all the same ways that I found wine interesting, that it can capture a sense of time and place and is incredible smells and taste and organoleptic properties. And sort of lastly, I'm really focused on mushroom education. I want to help people become more passionate about mushrooms. I want to help them dispel some of the myths that are around mushrooms. And ultimately, I'd love to have a TV show where I get to teach people about mushrooms all the time. And I would love your guys' help and support in making that happen. So thank you very much for listening to me and letting me kick this off. I'm really excited to see the other presentations tonight. Thanks, guys.